Good morning. I'd invite you to open your Bibles to the book of Romans, Romans chapter 12. Yesterday, I received a phone call from a younger married couple in California that were members at the church that I worked with there. And they had just moved to Texas. And they had been there for about a month now, and they were just talking about the move and how they feel so far about where they are. And they brought up one of the things that's been hardest about leaving California. And one of the things that they brought up was a man named Gary Gibson, who is one of the best people I have ever had the privilege of knowing. One of the most sacrificial and loving and considerate people I've ever been able to be around. And in the conversation yesterday on the phone, they were talking about how much this man has meant to them and how hard it is to have said goodbye to him. But this man now I think he's about 75 or so. And I told him not too long ago that I've never really felt this way about somebody before, but I'd like to do his funeral one day. And he said, well, I'll make sure that I have $500 in the firebox to cover your plane ticket. This is the kind of guy he is. It was kind of funny, too. It's okay to laugh about that, even though I'm talking about a funeral. Thanks. Thank you. How does somebody get to a point where they affect so many people in that way? Did that happen by accident in the life of somebody like Gary Gibson? Or did he have to cultivate and work and think about the passages in the Bible that talk about loving even your enemies and being able to sacrifice for other people the way that God has called us to sacrifice? It's not just that somebody like Gary gets to the point that he is by cultivating love. He's also cultivated hatred in his life too. We're supposed to be people of love. We're supposed to be people who honor even the governing authorities that we might disagree with at times. But there is one thing in the Bible that we are commanded to hate. And I would say that if we haven't learned this righteous hatred, that we won't be able to be people who are perfectly loving. And we won't be people that are spiritually mature. The one thing that the Bible tells us to hate is in Romans chapter 12, verse 9, which is what we're going to be looking at in this lesson this morning, where Paul says to abhor or hate what is evil and hold fast to what is good. Now, we're continuing this series of lessons that we're looking at once a month on Sunday morning on Romans chapter 12. And this chapter, everything that's said in this chapter stems from and grows out of Romans 12, 1 and 2, which says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world. Why did that happen? Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. You notice from this text here that Paul is urging the Roman Christians, in light of God's mercies, look at all the ways that God has been good to you, and you can even go back into the first 11 chapters of Romans and see that in chapters 1 through 3, that the Gentiles are sinners, the Jews are sinners, we're all sinners, and what we need is the propitiation of Jesus' sacrifice to make us right with him. Look at his mercy. But then you've got Romans 4 through 8 that talk about how it's not just that he saves us by our faith, but he's also going to help make us into new creatures. He's going to help us put off the old man and put on the new man. Look at his mercy and his willingness and his desire to help us become changed people. And you could detail so many more things about that, but in light of how good God has been to you, here's the expectations that Romans 12 places on us. That we become living sacrifices, that we find and use our gift so that we can build up the local body of Christians, that we learn to let our love be genuine, like we talked about last time. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about abhorring what is evil and clinging to what is good. Now, before we start to detail this a little bit more, let me just ask you this question. How are you doing with hating or abhorring what is evil and clinging like a buoy to what is good? Let's go ahead and read Romans chapter 9, verses 12 through 20, Romans chapter 9, verses 9 through 21. And we're going to zero in at the second half of verse 9, but I just want to get the greater context again as we look at this text. Let love be genuine, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good, love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor, do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another, do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. What's being asked of us in this text is a very challenging thing to think through, and to be honest with myself about it, to know if I'm really cultivating the kind of heart that this passage wants me to cultivate. Why does that keep happening? The thing that's being asked of us, first of all, is to abhor what is evil. The idea of abhorring, there's a couple, seriously, why is that happening? Is there a different clicketizer or something that we can use? Now it's not even working. Man, I hate that. All right, abhor what's evil, like Satan trying to affect the technology. I don't know why that's happening. Whatever. All right. Did you notice that later on in this text, it talks about loving your enemies? Who are the kinds of people that you oftentimes like to abhor? Like the people that have wronged you in some kind of way? This text says that the thing that you have to learn to abhor is you have to abhor what is evil. And the word abhor means to shrink with abhorrence or to detest something. Can you just turn that thing off? It's just getting distracting now. Thank you. The idea of now this is going to be hard because I got passages that I needed to use here. This is all just such a terrible Sunday out now. All right. What are the kinds of things that you have a visceral, emotional reaction to? Like if you see roadkill or something, you see something that's like really gross and disgusting, you have a visceral reaction from it. Do you have that kind of a reaction to things that are evil? Or another definition of abhorring is to dislike, abhor, to have a horror about something. This text is saying that we're supposed to learn to cultivate that kind of a heart towards the things that are evil. Now, that's just the first half of the verse, though. So learn to abhor the things that are evil. The second half says to cling to that which is good. Or some versions are going to say something like, hold fast to that which is good. Do you know the first time in the Bible that we read about the word hold fast, that term, hold fast? The first time in the Bible that we hear that phrase is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, where it says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. What does it mean to hold fast in the marriage context? To hold fast in the marriage context says something about your undivided loyalty and devotion towards the one that you've married. Is that true in your life? That the thing that you hate is evil, and you cling to whatever is good with the same kind of devotion that you would for your wife? Now, that's what's being asked of us in this text. Why is that a challenging calling? What makes that a hard thing for us to do in our life? The first reason why this would be hard is because evil can be a useful thing in our lives sometimes. Have you ever figured that out before? That evil can be useful? Even in this text, in Romans 12, verse 17, where it says, repay no one evil for evil. How many of you have ever had a time before where you found that if you treated somebody with a little bit of disrespect, and you kind of let them know what you know, and you kind of show some authority over them in some kind of a way that's a little ungodly, but they needed it. And when you did that, it kind of made things a little bit better for you. You kind of threw a tantrum, and you got your way in some way. And so it was kind of useful for you to show evil in some capacity. And then it taught you that doing this makes you get your way. All right, very good. I got my way now. Evil can be useful. And if I'm going to learn to abhor what's evil, that means that I have to give up whatever utility I've ever received from evil. Are you willing to do that? Notice another reason why this would be a challenging calling is because evil is pleasurable momentarily. Does the Bible teach that evil is pleasurable? Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 and 25. By faith, when he was grown up, talking about Moses, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. The Bible teaches that sin, evil, is pleasurable, but only for just a few moments. In the action that you're committing, in that moment, there's some pleasure involved in it. Can you imagine being Pharaoh? He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. That means he's growing up in royalty, like Mike preached on not too long ago. Look at all the things that he would have given up. But by faith, he was willing to do that. If I'm going to learn to hate what's evil, one of the things that means I have to give up and sacrifice is the momentary pleasure that I would get from evil. Here's another reason why this is a challenging idea, is that righteous hatred is holistic. This text is not saying, pat yourself on the back for abhorring the evil things that you already abhorred, but then found out that the Bible said was evil. I like what Charles Spurgeon said on this point, where he said, and there are some people who think others extremely guilty for committing iniquities which they do not care to commit, but they themselves commit other sins with which they deal very gently. You see the point? Do you ever do this where you go, I can't believe this person would do or say such and such, and it just makes me so mad that they would do that. But then within your own heart, you've got pride and ego and lust issues, but you kind of you're a little more gentle with those things in your heart. If I'm going to learn to hate what's evil and abhor what's evil, it's a holistic thing. I hate all evil. I hate it within me. I hate it when it's manifested in other people, though I love the people that manifest it, and I'm trying to figure out how to discern those kinds of things in my interactions with them. But it's a holistic thing. Don't pat yourself on the back if there's certain forms of evil that you hate, and then there's other kinds of evil that you harbor and kind of pet in your heart and let grow and continue. Notice another reason why this is challenging is that righteous hatred is going to make me unpopular. Some of us might be tempted, all of us in different ways are going to be tempted to go along with things that society says is good, but God calls evil. If I'm going to say that those things are evil, then I'm not going to fit in as well in my work environment. And then I might have to walk away from certain friends, or certain friends might walk away from me. And so the peer pressure and the social challenge of learning this thing that Romans 12:9 is telling us to do is challenging in that regard as well. But I want you to go back for a moment. Go back to Romans chapter 1. And in Romans chapter 1, you see what I think is the longest list of sins in all of the New Testament. So this is a list of a lot of things that are evil. Look at Romans chapter 1, verses 28 to 32. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanders, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval, likes on social media, to those who practice these things. You look at that list, is there anything in that list that gives you like that shuddered, like abhorrence kind of feel to it? Well, there'd be some of these things in this list that makes us feel that way, but challenge yourself if your hatred is holistic. Do you really hate strife? Do you hate it? Or are you the person that sometimes in conversations you have to drop certain things in a contrary kind of way to let everybody know your wisdom or whatever so you can try to impress other people? Do you hate that you do that sometimes? Do you hate it? Do you want that to change in your life? Or, and I'm not saying it's always wrong to be contrary to what somebody says. There's times that that's necessary. But if you're doing it in a way where you're just trying to stir the pot and you kind of like doing that sort of thing, do you see that you've got to learn to hate that? What about gossip in verse 29? I remember one time shortly after I became a Christian, we grew up with a lot of dogs in our house all the time, and when my mom and dad were gone, they would leave the TV on for the dogs. They also had their own places at the dinner table, and we would throw food across the dinner table, and they would catch it in the air. My family, we were crazy. And there was one time when I had got home from school and the TV was on to the Tyra Banks show, which was like a talk show with a bunch of people that talked about stuff because that's what they do on shows like that. And Tyra Banks was talking about how helpful gossip can be in relationships, in developing a better relationship with somebody. You feel closer with the person that you're gossiping with. Do you hate the idea of gossip? Does it make you shudder? What about verse 30? What about boastfulness? Do you hate the idea that you would ever say something in a conversation to let somebody know how successful and how smart you are, what you've accomplished, how much money you have? Do you hate the idea that you would ever do something like that? When you do it, do you walk away hating that you did that? Notice another one in verse 30, disobedient to parents. How many of you kids in this church that have been baptized into Christ, still living with mom and dad under their roof, how many of you hate the idea of being disobedient to your parents, though you've signed up to serve the Lord? Do you hate that idea of disrespecting and disobeying your parents? Well, what would it say about me if I don't have that kind of reaction to these sorts of things that God would call evil? I want to briefly show you 3 passages from the Old Testament. All of them have something in common. All of them deal with this concept of righteous hatred. Look at the first one here in Proverbs 8, verse 13. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance and the way of evil and perverted speech I hate. All right. So according to this passage, how do I know if I fear the Lord? If I hate what is evil. That's the first passage. Notice the second one, Psalm 97, verse 10. O you who love the Lord, hate evil. He preserves the lives of his saints. He delivers them from the hand of the wicked. Those who love the Lord are called to hate evil. So if I really love God, what am I going to do? I'm going to hate whatever is evil, whatever is contrary to him. Notice the third passage, Psalm 119, 104. Through your precepts I get understanding, therefore I hate every false way. God, as I learn more and more about your ways, it makes me hate every false way all the more. By the way, think about the things that you learn in your life, the things that you feed yourself with. Isn't it the case that whatever we feed ourselves with is going to cause us to hate the thing that's contrary to it. Here's one example. You might feed yourself with one kind of political slant on the news all the time. Would that make you hate the other side? Would that cultivate hate on the other side? Maybe you're learning all about your favorite sports team, like the Philadelphia Eagles, and it makes me hate the Dallas Cowboys a lot. And so if you're like learning about your favorite sports team, it's going to make you hate the rivals, and that's going to grow more and more. Now, you look at this passage, these three passages. Do you suppose that there's people that would say, oh yeah, I fear God, I love God, I learn from God, but you look at their life and it doesn't seem like you hate evil? And if you're not learning to hate that which is evil, these passages would call into question, do you really fear God? Do you really love God? Are you actually learning anything that God has to say about anything? Because there's things in our society that people are trying to say are actually good, and you're starting to go along with some of these things and actually be apologetic to what the Bible says about these matters. Are you sure that you love God? Do you see the challenge here? I don't know that any of us could look at what is being asked of us in this text and feel like we're totally pure. Because of our former lives that we used to live, and because of the constant influence of wicked things around us, one of our biggest problems in our life, maybe it's our biggest problem, I don't know, is that we've learned to cultivate too much of a love for things that are evil. And we've got to get these things cut out of our hearts. So we have to ask the question then, what are some reasons to hate evil? We're not saying as much in this lesson about clinging to what is good. I want to focus more on the learning to hate aspect of all of this. But the first reason that we should learn to hate whatever is evil is because evil grieves you. Evil in your life might have momentary pleasure like we talked about earlier. But you think about all the times that you've done something wicked, and nobody else knew about it, or maybe you said some words to somebody that you shouldn't have said, and you knew that it was going to bring tension into that relationship. Whatever it's been, you always feel terrible after you've done these things. And maybe you can go on living and not think too deeply about the things that you've done and feel decent about it, I guess. But maybe one of the worst parts about what evil has done to us is it's caused us to not see the beauty of Jesus. It's caused our ears to be stopped up from listening to the message of salvation. It's caused our eyes to not see the goodness of God. Do you see it right now? Do you see the goodness of God? Is there anything that's more impressive to you this morning than the goodness of God? And if the answer is that there is something more impressive in the way that I'm thinking about, in the way that I've been conditioned to think about the world right now, do you see that it's evil that's caused that in your heart? To not be able to see the things that you ought to see. I like what somebody said about this, where he said, Christian, hate evil. It has been your murderer. It has put its dagger to your heart. It has thrust poison into your mouth. It has done you all the mischief that hell itself could do, mischief which would have wrought your eternal undoing, had not the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ prevented. You have good reason then to hate sin. When has evil things ever been good for your marriage? When have evil things ever been good for your kids? When have evil things ever made you feel better long term, not just in the moment? And you look at how much evil has stabbed you and harmed you and hurt you, but yet we keep going back to it again. Meditate on that. Think about what it's done to you. You know, one of the challenges of clinging to what is good is I remember when I first became a Christian, I thought, okay, I got to change my life. And all these things that I used to do, I got to get these things out of my life. But it sure seems like everything God tells me that I can't do are all the things that I really like to do. It's like God is like taking all of the Easter basket candy away from me that I used to enjoy. Deuteronomy 10:13. keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding you today for your good. Going back to the dogs that we had growing up, obvious lead into the dogs. We had to have a fence in the backyard because my dog Lulu, if she ran away, she would die. Like, she would not come back. So we had to build this fence in the backyard, and if she went up to the fence and was like frustrated that this fence was keeping her a prisoner in our backyard, she didn't have the wisdom to know, because she was a dog, she didn't have the wisdom to know that that fence is for your good, because without that fence, you're going to kill yourself. What is God's law to us? These boundaries that we can't go beyond, and if we do, every time you've done it, you know it's hurt you. Think about that, and that should cultivate a greater hatred for the things that are evil. But notice another reason, is that evil grieves other people. I saw this a couple years ago, a video online of babies that are born with drug addiction, where the mom, during the pregnancy, the mom was doing some kind of illicit drug that she found on the streets. And a baby's born like this, going through drug withdrawals already. That evil didn't just affect the mom, it affects the kids. And there's all kinds of cultural examples that we could think about where that would be the application. But think about amongst fellow Christians. Think about it in your family first. If you're always blowing up in anger in your family, do you see how that's hurting the kids? Do you see how that's hurting the husband or the wife? Do you see that? What about amongst Christians then in like this church family? How many church splits have happened because it was just purely a doctrinal difference? How often do personalities have to get involved and ego and pride get in the way? I'll tell you some pieces of advice that Christians have given me over the years that could only have come about from them experiencing deep pain from other Christians. There's a preacher who told me one time, whatever church you work with, don't ever get close to the congregation. And I said, why? And he said, because if they get close to you and they get to know you in a deep way, they'll end up using those things against you. Why would a preacher ever give advice like that? Because that probably happened to him at one point, right? I've heard other Christians say, don't ever, ever get into business ventures with other Christians. Don't ever do it. Well, why would that Christian say that? Because she's seen people get hurt in a lot of ways. I've seen somebody before want Samantha and I to study with his girlfriend. She becomes a Christian, and then he's pressing her to be intimate with her. Before they're ever even married, she falls away. How much can Christians harm one another with our evil? When we're not checking and we're not really concerned with the kind of growth that we ought to be concerned with, and then it's like we're really powerful in this environment out in the world, and then we just take that kind of thing that we've learned in the world and then we plop it into this pond and we try to be the big fish in this pond and all these. Are we really concerned about how that's affecting other people? Look at Romans chapter 2, verses 23 and 24. It doesn't just affect fellow Christians, but it affects non-Christians. In Romans 2, 23 and 24, you who boast in the law, I'm a Christian, I study the Bible. He's talking about Jews here particularly, but the application would be, I know the Bible, I read the Bible, yes, yes, yes. You dishonor God by breaking the law. For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. I went to the Czech Republic a few summers ago, and the second day we were there, we got like a tour of Prague, and we went to a museum where there were all kinds of religious artifacts, like depictions of Jesus' crucifixion. The Prague Castle, I think, is the third biggest castle in all the world, and it has this giant cathedral at it. And then there's church buildings all over the place. And I asked one of the locals, how come there doesn't seem to be much religious interest today? I know that some of these forms of religion were not correct forms of religion. But why is it today that in a place like that, there's just not much religious interest, period? And one of the locals said to me, If your country had a history of the Crusades and people using religion as a power play over other people, you'd understand why. How much wickedness has been done in the name of Mr. God when the thing that you're really caring about is Mr. You and not a genuine concern for other people? I've heard it said before that one militant atheist does far less damage to the name of Christ than 10 hypocritical Christians. Make that 100. Evil harms everybody around you. And you've harmed other people with your evil in your life. Do you hate that? Notice, though, finally, that evil grieves God as well. God is Father, Son, Holy Spirit. There's passages that talk about every component of God, every person of God, however you want to say it, being grieved by things that are evil. Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 and 6, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. You ever look at God as like this stoic, has no feelings about anything? When God looked down shortly after creation in Genesis chapter 6, and he sees that people are, and notice, by the way, he's starting with what they're thinking. And we know later on in this chapter that there's violence in the earth, but notice when God looks down, he notices what people are thinking, the intentions of the heart, and it's grieving him. Notice another passage, Ephesians 4, verse 30, do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Or Luke 19, 41 and 42, actually. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. Jesus is drawing near to Jerusalem, and he says, I wish that you guys had the eyes to see the things that would have brought peace to your nation. Notice, by the way, how blinded these people were, because they were so fixated on their power and their status that they couldn't see anything else. And here Jesus is looking at these people who have this blindness, and it's grieving him. Now you think about somebody in your life who has shown some shade, some degree, some small percentage of the love of God towards you. I think about Gary Gibson and all the kindness he's ever shown to me. I would never want to grieve that man. Why would we deal gently with any sin in our heart when the God who gave us life, the God who put us into a family, the God who's given us purpose, the God who went to the cross for us and endured through the Garden of Gethsemane, went to the cross, rose from the dead, why would we ever want to hurt that God's heart by allowing sin to metastasize and evil? Why would we want to continually do that when, even though we're not perfect in this regard, he keeps forgiving us? Doesn't that give us the strength to put all of this to death in our life? Will any of us in this room ever totally hate what is evil consistently in our hearts? Will we ever get to that point in this life? I don't think so. But are we working towards that? Or are we allowing the world to conform us into its own image? Every one of these lessons, we begin and end with Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. How are you doing with this? Next time you have some moment that brings out some kind of evil in you, just stop for a moment and take a snapshot of what's happening in your heart. And save that picture and look at it after the fact and say, why was I doing that? And how can I take that picture and rip it up and burn it so that I can be a sacrifice to the Lord who sacrificed everything for me? If there's anybody here this morning that needs help in some way, you're in a room filled with people that will help you and sacrifice their time to talk with you, or you always have the option to come forward while we stand and while we sing.